Cool. Yeah. I mean, right. I was a SOTAC. That's what we call it.
Yeah, I saw that.
NSF. I wasn't ever very good, right? So on deployments, we always had a CCT attached, right? So usually the SF SOTACs don't get to actually do stuff in combat because it's kind of like, well, we got this dude whose whole job is to do this.
Yeah.
Probably.
Well, it's interesting. And I guess we'll officially start this since we're sitting here talking about this. The CCTs aren't
Yep.
actually supposed to be JTACs. That's just like another
Yeah.
attachment. That's another job that's not even all of them. I don't think even all of them are JTACs. I think that's part of their
Yeah.
like training down the line or whatever. But it is weird. It's also kind of like that for when Marine Raiders or recon guys go to TACP school or to SOTAC, either one. And for those that don't know, TACP school is the Tactical Air Control Party. And that's what the Marines and Navy use out at EWTG LANT, EWTG PAC, which is Expeditionary Warfare Training Group Atlantic and Pacific. And then SOTAC is the Special Operations, you can correct me on this, Special
Yeah.
Operations Terminal Attack Controller course.
Yep. That's it. And yeah, so I actually learned that about CCT because that course, CCTs go to it, SEALs go to it, Raiders go to it, SF guys go to it. We all go to it. And I had 4 or 5 CCTs in the class, and talking to them, they said the same thing. They're like, yeah, this actually is just one of our,
Yeah, it's like my
myriad
fifth
jobs.
job. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's,
But that's kind of how it is. That's kind of how it is for us too, which is so hard because as an SF guy on a team, you have so many jobs and so many hats that you're supposed to stay proficient in. So especially as you get at the high levels of senior leadership, like I got to, you're the main element leader. And so you're in control of moving your element, Afghans, coordinating with everybody, right? You might also be, there's guys that are Halo jump masters. There's so many different qualifications you need to stay up on that it becomes, and you, as you know, being a Florida observer and a JTAC, that really needs to be a full-time job. I mean, it's serious. There's no room for error. And so for us, it's kind of just like, oh, try to fit it in where you can, and just try to stay current. And it's kind of not really the right answer for something that's got such a high chance of absolute catastrophe when it goes wrong. So
yeah, 100%. No, I completely agree. That's that's one of those things that unless you've been in the fire support community, if you've or if you're under a commander that's never been like a JTAC or anything like that, and they don't really understand it. They understand you drop bombs and stuff, but they don't understand how technical it is. It's like, dude, this is a lot of stuff to be good at it. This is a lot of stuff for an individual to do, let alone be at your fifth task. That's why, like, when I was on the 11th MEU, our recon team that was attached to the MEU had like a bunch of JTACs on it, on paper. But when we go through their books, they're missing controls. There's a lot of this stuff. And we worked with those guys to kind of bring them up to speed because we had the time and stuff. But generally, they don't have the time because they're shooting packages, their CQB courses. There's all this. They have a myriad of other things that they have to do, dive stuff, jump missions, all these things that they have to do. And you really see it. You're like, yeah, we can say that this team has like a JTAC on it if you want, but really, the guy isn't that like. It's not the best answer, and that's why I always advocated when I was with Anglico. It was like, hey, take one of the Anglico JTACs. That's literally all they do. This is these specialists. Like take one of these guys and use them. For your fires planning because they understand the planning and stuff. Because that's a huge part that people forget about. Yeah, okay, you can spit out a 9-line, but let's talk about pre-mission planning, understanding where we need to hold aircraft, elevations, offsets, to remain outside of audible range, stuff like that. I love that job though. It's like running a symphony.
Yeah, and we had on my 2018 deployment, we had an Air Force CCT, and we had obviously for us, usually your team leader. They come fresh out of the Q course. They're the one guy, the officer comes straight in, and his first 2 years is the team time. So
So they come straight in as a team leader?
Yeah, so
that's interesting.
For the officers, that's their very first gig, or it should be, right? It's supposed to be is they come out of the course, they come straight to a team, and they only do 2 years on the team. That's kind of it's actually a funny story. So my dad's a retired Green Beret as well, and I went to college before I came in, so I came in a little bit late. And talking to him, I was thinking, okay, I'm going to come in and commission, and he's the one who talked me out of it, because he was an enlisted guy too, and was like, you really want to do that job, you're going to get 2 years on a team, and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
The rest of your entire career is staff and admin. So yeah, it's unfortunate for them, but that's how that works. But with that comes sort of, some of the officers had some combat experience from infantry units and whatnot, but for a lot of them, they come in and, they come straight to a team. Like our officer got to the team on that trip during our PMT. So like a month before we left, and straight out of the Q course. So he's dealing with a CCT and like the complexities of it, and on the ground and on the mission, and trying them working together. It really took a couple months before, those cylinders actually fired, and that air section of things was going well, because it's so much. It's on the ground. It's its whole separate, universe of what's happening. So that air controller sort of being that intermittent between the commander, the units, and the aircraft all at once. I mean, it's definitely, like you said, a symphony. Again, I was never great at it, so I'm more, when I went to the course, we had no JTAC internal on the team. And so it was like, hey, we need to have one of these, because we're supposed to MTOD have one.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I went. But then there's so much else to do that I never would have felt comfortable actually doing it in a real combat situation, because we just don't get enough time to.
Man, that's
really
I hate to hear that. I hate to hear that, because even after coming through the course, I mean, when you were done with SOTACC, how did you feel? Did you feel comfortable then, and then it just kind of gradually wore away because it's one of those things you have to maintain?
Yeah.
Or
so coming out of the course, you feel pretty good about it. You know what I mean? It's an awesome course for sure.
I've only heard good things about it.
Yeah, it's a super cool course down in Yuma, and you get to do pretty much everything in it. And coming out of the course, you feel good. But then again, I came out of the course, and I'm pretty sure, I don't remember exactly what happened, but I had to leave right away for something else. So it was like 3 months before because you're supposed to do, there's kind of a validation afterwards, that you have to actually be validated to be a SOTACC. So the school doesn't actually get you there completely. And I had to wait like 3 months, come back. I was doing something else. And then it was like almost like starting all over again, and it just makes it, and it's almost like that every 3-4 months, just trying to stay up on your certs. And, I just was spent a couple of years out in Okinawa, our forward operating, first group's forward operating base there. And it's even harder because you can't do any live ordnance there. So the JTACs have to fly all the way back to America just to do their research, and then fly back. And you're trying to balance that between what your ODA is doing, what you might also have. And yeah, it's some guys manage to do it. I know some SF guys that are really, really good at it, but I was already in senior positions on the team by the time I went. So I sort of had a lot of other responsibilities that was kind of like, this can't be my whole, this can't be my whole focus. And we also were going into a Afghanistan train up pretty shortly after that, a couple months after that. And I was the main element leader on one of the elements. So it was like, there's no way I can, for one, I can't be the main element leader and also be the JTAC, right? That is just, because the JTAC needs to be with the commander, and the commander is not with the forward elements. So yeah.
Yeah, I remember when I went to Afghanistan in 2013 with an advisor team. They found out I was motor T when I first came in. So the S4, the logistics officer on our team, was trying to rope me into like being like a motor pool guy for like the Afghans or something. And I'm like, hey man, I'm here to be the fucking JTAC, dude. You're not roping me into this other stuff. And the guys that were on advisor teams before me told me, they're like, hey man, a lot of these dudes don't understand what the JTACs do. So they're making them like machine gunners, and they're making them these other jobs. So you need to like kind of push back against that. And I was like, all right, cool. And I just had to like let them know like up front, like, you can't make me a driver, because I mean, I can drive if I have to, but that I'm supposed to be on the radio, and the radio's on the other side of the MRAP, or whatever. So it's like, that's just not, that doesn't make sense. So yeah, it's one of those again, it's one of those jobs. It's super technical. And unless you've ever been really exposed to it, it's like, I don't know, it's kind of hard to understand the complexity behind it. And one thing I tried to pound in, like you mentioned before, I always tried to pound into guys that we were training and the JFOs we were working with and we were getting ready to send up to the actual schoolhouse and stuff like that, was like, the reality of this job is serious, man. And if you fuck it up, you're throwing live ordnance downrange at something you weren't supposed to. And that's not cool. Obviously that's a huge deal. And it's like, so you always try to reinforce that on like the OP and stuff, because sometimes it becomes an admin OP because you're just trying to get controls in to meet currency requirements and stuff like that, and you just have to like reinforce like, hey, if your guy's not hitting the right target, that's a board reset, let's work this like you would kind of in combat, because if it's hitting something wrong or off just a little bit, that's still a big deal. That's a huge deal if you got rockets and guns streaking the wrong building, even if it's right next to the correct one. So
yeah, we'll probably get into some of this later, but I got 3-4 different funny stories of our CCT, our JTAC being so preoccupied in heinous situations of me literally grabbing him and like yanking him out of the middle of a gunfight, that he's just standing there staring as bullets are whizzing by, staring at a screen, talking to the aircraft. He was standing in a doorway one time when we were about to BIP this cache, which right about to go off, and he's just standing in an open doorway like 10 feet away. You grab him and throw him out of the way. A funny story about using Quick One, his very first combat mission. We had the 160th, right? So for those of you who don't know about the 160th, they will drop you right on target. They do not care. You fly in. We did pretty much on our 2018 trip all nighttime raids. And so the 160th, most of the conventional helicopter pilots, they won't land within 300-400 meters of an objective. So you got to land and you got to walk, do all that. But the 160th will land you 10 feet in front of the first compound. They don't care. So it was his first combat operation, and he's in the back of the 160th, plugged in, talking to the pilots, controlling air, because that's what they do. They control aircraft on the way in for pre-fires and all that different stuff. And we did a split infill to where we had 2 CH-47s. So half of one of the element, there was half of one of the element on, so half of element 1, half in element 2 to be able to fit on the bird. So the first half was supposed to get off. The helicopter is going to lift off and go to the other side of the objective and drop the other half off. Well, our commander and my element, we get off and we're getting ready to move through the objective, and the commander is like, where's the CCT? And everybody's looking around, and we get on he's not with us, and he's supposed to be with the commander. And we get on the radio, and the other element lets us know, like, hey, he's with us. He couldn't get off the aircraft in time, because the second the element's off of the bird and the 160th, they're gone. Uh-huh. So he was trying to get unplugged from the aircraft. He looks up, and they're in the sky. So we had to walk, I didn't, but one of my senior other guys had to walk, almost probably 1,000 meters around this sketchy village to bring him back. But no knock on him. It's just, there's so much going on, right? He's talking to 6 different aircraft, pre-firing strikes. And with the 160th, there's no time for air. It's on and off the bird and they're gone. So just kind of some ideas for people of like how preoccupied these guys are with everything going around, that, even bullets going by and all that, like they can be completely oblivious to it, because you listen into it, on a headset with all of those pilots, and he also is listening to, the element on the ground, which is our guys, on one side of the head, and on the other side is the pilot. So you got to be able to, handle all that information going on simultaneously, and it's definitely a skill.
I used to have that's what I had, was the Peltor dual comm headset, and exactly ran 2 radios. It was like our team radio on one, and then the air on the other. And then, you know, sometimes you have people come up, talk to you, and you're like,
Yeah,
oh, like,
yeah.
trying to pull one off. Like,
Well,
what's
yeah,
that?
that too, right? So when you know, when we're moving up to compounds and stuff like that, and you know, I would typically, as an element leader, would be listening to the pilots as well, just so I wouldn't have to ask him, you know, what's the slant on this building. So slant, for, you know, military jargon, right? I know I'm trying to learn as I get out, but slant, for those who don't know, is, you know, men, women, children. It's the idea of who's inside this building before we go up to it, right? So the pilots with the ISR can give us an idea of what we're about to step into. So rather than me walking up to him, you know, hey, what's the slant in there and all that, usually it's better if your element leader can actually just be hearing it and then sort of decomplex that situation.
Yeah. Yeah. It was, that's one of those things you have to preach to people too, though, is to just make sure you're staying aware, situational awareness. You can't get sucked into a map, can't get sucked into, you know, a tablet and stuff like that.
Yep.
I remember when I was in TCP school, we were sitting, it was like our first time ever doing talk on, and we were on like a pier or something over at Little Creek, and I got the radio and I'm talking, and I have a map, and they give you these shitty maps with like cloud coverage on it and stuff like that. They're like, you know, it's like, so it's not even that great anyways. And I'm like looking at the map and I'm trying to figure out kind of how to do this talk on. And then really the best thing that could have happened was a gust of wind came and blew the map and blew it into the water. And I was oh shit. And I looked at the instructor and he's like, now what? And I'm like, oh, and I just started like looking around like, okay, do you see? And then I saw like a UPS truck going down the street. I'm like, do you see the box truck heading south? And they're like, yeah. And then, you know, just started. So it's easy to get sucked into the map because there's a lot of information there, but really you gotta remember to bring your head up and look around at what's going on. When you guys get a CCT, how long are they with the team? Is it are they attachment for the deployment? Do you get multiple ones during the deployment, or?
So it's kind of weird because they're on their own rotations, right? So when we got there, we swapped a different ODA out from 7th Group, and he had been with them for a month or so, and then probably 4 months into our trip, he rotated out, and then a different CCT rotated in. So they aren't with us on the train ups or anything like that. It's the same as our EOD guys that we had attached to us. Same way, they were already there when we got there. So they're on their own deployment schedule, and they're sort of working out of a camp, I guess you could say. And then, so they don't actually like deploy with us.
That's kind of weird, right?
I mean, so we did. Yeah. So it is, but it's also brings a lot of good continuity, right? So having that CCT and those EOD guys who have already been on the team, because we're operating sort of in the same area as the team before us that we're replacing was operating out of. So having those guys there for a month or so ahead of time, they have a lot of good information to give us, right? They also are good continuity between the prior ODA and us coming in. So there are some benefits to it like that. Where you lose out in having that, you know, formal train up with those guys. So, you know, the commander and the CCT have been working together for a long time and really ironing that out. So you're ironing that out sort of in the first couple missions rather than beforehand. So there's positives and negatives to each scenario, I guess.
Yeah, I think I like how the Raiders do it, where they bring like all their attachments do a workup with them. And, you know, they bring everybody out together and come back with everybody. Yeah, I think you're right. The continuity is obviously really good, but I mean, having that JTAC or that EOD guy working right alongside the team members and understanding how guys are going to move on an objective and how, you know, they're going to do things, because everybody gets the same kind of base level training and stuff, but every team and stuff has their own SOPs and TTPs that they're going to enact. So that would kind of suck to be like 2/3 of the way through a deployment and a team shows up and now you're like, fuck, I got to change how I'm even doing everything because this new team, this is not how they do it, you know?
For sure. And, you know, it also can affect the way the team operates, especially like the EOD guys. So and because you never know what you're going to get, right? When we showed up, the senior EOD tech had like 5 combat deployments, and he's one of the craziest guys I've ever seen. But then you might get the next guys rotate in who are super risk adverse and won't do anything. And so now all of a sudden, the way we've been operating for 4 months, has to actually change too, because, hey, we want to do this. Well, we need the EOD guys to help us do that, or clear something. And they're like, no way. And you're like, well, this is what we've been doing for 4 months. You know what I mean? So, and also, with your CCT too. So for us, our first CCT, he was newer and he was younger, and he got pretty good. And then the next CCT that rolled in had tons of combat deployments as a JTAC, and he was insanely good. I mean, it was, as soon as he was there, it was firing on all cylinders. You know what I mean? So
nice.
You get that variance of skill as well. But we're pretty adaptable on SF teams. So throughout our deployment, wasn't just our ODA. We had 3 guys hit by a grenade, injured, taken out for a while. And then we had to plus up with guys from different ODAs in the companies, get a medic here, get an extra 18 Charlie here or whatever, to get us plussed up. So it's a pretty adaptable unit, which, makes that easier too when you're dealing with personnel swapping in and out.
Is that different for you though? Because you're like, okay, this guy went to the Q course, like we can trust him. Is it like
no,
is it one of those?
It's funny is, our big thing was like, hey, I want to get as many Americans on the ground as possible, right? So we took out our company XO, who wasn't an SF guy at all on one. We would usually take out 4 or 5 uplift guys from, I think the 101st was out there. So we would take 4, 5, 6 of those guys, and they would typically be security for the, the command and in the rear and stuff like that. But it's cool for them because they got combat experience, for sure, with an SF team. But and plussing up SF guys that on other teams that weren't doing much at the time, we'd really take as many as we could get, just because, ultimately I'd rather have American soldiers next to me than relying on Afghans, which, for those of you who don't know how special forces teams work, we're on a 12-man team, and most of the time you don't even have that many guys, right? So when we go out on missions, it's 10 or 11 Americans with 60 to 100 Afghans, and then we split up into typically 2 to 4 different elements to clear through villages. So a lot of times it might just be me and another Green Beret by ourselves with 10, 12 Afghans, right? Yeah. So it's when it's sketchy, you think back on it and you're like, oh my God, that's a sketchy thing to do. But so anytime you can add another American soldier, whether he be an EOD tech or a SOTACC or a photographer or whatever, to that element. So now I have 3 Americans, or now I have 4 Americans with me. It makes you feel a lot more comfortable with what you're doing, because things can, as everybody who's worked with the Afghans knows, there's, you can feel a lot of hairs on your neck stand up when things aren't going, as smoothly as you'd like them to.
Yeah, we had so again, on my 2013 deployment, I was in Sangin as an Afghan advisor, and we were in this, like, we had an Afghan team go forward out of this patrol base. They were just on like a local patrol or something like that, and got attacked. And it was pretty bad. Their company commander had been killed. Like 6 guys had gotten killed. And we were at the patrol base, and they were firing at us from like this tree line. And we were trying to like organize a group of dudes to go out and, go get them.
I played that game before, for sure.
And at the same time, I'm trying to get aircraft in. They're shooting SPG-9s, which are the recoilless rifles. If people don't know what that is, that shit's loud as fuck. There's just a lot going on. And this Afghan comes up and was like, hey, there's Taliban in the building behind us. And we're like, really? And he was like, yeah, shoot a 203 into it or whatever. And we're like, well, we didn't see anybody. We didn't see anybody. And he keeps telling us to do this. And we're like, no, dude, we're not, until we see someone over there, we're not even taking fire from over there. It's coming from literally the opposite direction. And he got pissed and told the interpreter, was like, if you guys don't help us, I'm going to kill you and the Americans. The interpreter told us, we gave a pistol to the interpreter. We're like, watch that dude while we take care of this. And at the end of the day, he came back and apologized. He was like, it was just there was no one in that building except for some women and kids that came out after we said we weren't going to. So I was like, see, dude, like, but yeah, I mean, when tensions are high, man, it can get a little weird, and I've definitely been in a room. I remember being in a room with me and Fosberg this guy I was deployed with, and it was me and him and like 15 Afghans in this little room. And I looked up, and I think I looked up on the wall, and there was this like hearts and arrows drawing or something like that, which was like an identified like artwork that was they'd seen on like suicide bombers and like tattoos and shit like that. And they're like, so, you know, be aware if you see this or whatever. And I remember looking up on the wall and seeing that and being like, oh, what the fuck? You know, like, no way. And I don't know. It's just, it definitely gives you those like, those weird feelings occasionally. But a lot of those guys are good dudes, you know?
So yeah, that's what I was just going to say. So we were fortunate that, so we had sort of a split unit, but we had, we were working with the 3rd SOC Commandos, but then we also had an ANA SF team. So the actual tabbed Afghan Special Forces guys, right? And they were, now I'm not going to say they're at the level of you know, American SF or really even American soldier, but they were so far beyond proficient than the Commandos. So that we tried to have those guys out there all the time because they would fight. They knew how to fight. A lot of those guys have been fighting the Taliban for 15 years, right? So, and there were some really good dudes that we worked with. The Commandos, for, you know, they were okay, not as tactically proficient, but what we would see sometimes is, and you know, I always try to tell people that have never been to Afghanistan, it's like the whole Afghans versus Taliban is kind of a really fluid thing, right? So there's a lot of, hey, Taliban one day and maybe ANA the next. For example, multiple times on missions, we'd show up to do a raid and there would be ANA police cars parked outside, right? So there's ANA police officers hanging out with the Taliban, right? And so, you know, there's a few different missions. One that was the sketchiest, where me and my other teammate, the element we ended up completely stopped moving with them and then moving ourselves back to a different element because they had all these guys that were super upset that we were, you know, destroying cars, and we had found probably like 30 pounds of heroin and we were going to destroy it, you know, and they were getting super upset and sketchy towards us because, you know, they didn't like the fact that we were destroying this Taliban stuff, right? So you have to be, and, you know, you can't ever let your partner force know where you're going, what area you're going to, because if you do, you'll show up and it's always a dry hole because somebody will call their buddy, you know, that's still living in the village. I like to tell people, think about like if somebody invaded America, right, and it became sort of left versus right or whatever, and, you know, your high school where you went to is working with whatever foreign country, but then you got a buddy that went to the high school down the road and he's working for the other unit, right? Well, he might be your best friend and, you know, you're on two different sides, but if you know that my unit's going to go raid your village or your neighborhood, you're probably going to call them up and tell them to get out of there. So there's a lot of that goes on there as well. It's not as black and white as
for sure. And there's a lot of infighting. There's a lot of infighting amongst the Taliban because there's local and like foreign Taliban.
Yeah. You mentioned that. We actually would see that all the time to where, you know, the Taliban would team up with one ANA group to attack a different ANA checkpoint. So that way, you know, they wouldn't get attacked. And there's just all kinds of stuff. Like it's such a tribal type of thing there. You know what I mean? Or
I remember saying in the local Taliban were fighting the ones that came across from like Pakistan and shit because they were like, the dudes that came in were more like thuggish and like shows up and they're like, hey, you got to give me this compound. You know, you have to house me. You have to whatever. And the local dudes are like, dude, F you, bro. And part of it was their, you know, part of the IO campaign over the years was like, hey, you know, Taliban dudes, you're out here fighting and dying and your leadership is in Pakistan living a good life. What are you doing? And that's not untrue, you know? And I think a lot of them started to become aware of that. And then when these international dudes would show up and be like, oh, I'm in charge now. And they're like, F you, bro. This is like literally my neighborhood. So get out of here. You know?
And that got even more so when we were there because ISIS had moved in, right? And so you have all this triangular sort of fighting that's going on because the Taliban, for the most part, didn't want ISIS there. And ISIS had pretty much taken all of Nangarhar Valley. We weren't working in that area, but a couple of our couple of our teams in our company did the big 3-week op to basically clear all of Nangarhar Valley and pretty much eliminated ISIS from Afghanistan on that trip.
Were
that
they
late 2018.
Were they coming in as foreign fighters? Were they bringing in dudes, or is it just like a name change?
Yeah,
like the local dudes
no,
are like, no, we're ISIS now.
No, they were. No, they definitely had migrated in, and sort of that also is one of those complexities too, because most of the Afghans, they're not Arabic, right? Whereas ISIS was an Arab fighting force for the most part. So yeah, you had, because we would find out all the time, ISIS and the Taliban are fighting each other up in the Nangarhar Valley, and then now we're heading in there. So yeah, it got a little chaotic in that way. But yeah.
What a weird world, what a weird,
yeah.
They're still, I think they're still hitting pockets of like ISIS dudes over there occasionally. When you're over there and you have this kind of situation where you have Taliban and ISIS guys, does that shift, or did you see a priority shift in that? How do you identify, which ones were the easier ones to identify? Which ones were like the harder fighters? Can you give us some characteristics of each?
For sure. So, also we got to talk about the ROE is different for each one. So the ROE for the Taliban, now, again, the two that we deployed, and I don't like to get political, but the reality is we deployed pretty much right after Trump made the speech about how we're not there to nation build, we're there to kill terrorists, right? And then we loosened the ROE up way. So even for the Taliban, the ROE was loose because we were there to go in, do damage. And that's the whole point. But for ISIS ROE was shoot on sight, right? If you're identified as ISIS, like way they said, they could be sitting on the toilet, then it's kill on sight. Sort of how Iraq was during the invasion, right? Typically, so in our area, we operated pretty much exclusively out of the south. So Kandahar, a lot of stuff in Uruzgan, which is right above Kandahar, Tarin, all that area, up into the border of Helmand. And then we had our sister team that was operating pretty much exclusively in Helmand. So down in that south region was really a Taliban stronghold. That Helmand region has always been, for guys that have been to Afghanistan, though, that Helmand region has always been a nasty place. They've never really let that go. So the south, there's sort of that heroin Silk Road that runs from Pakistan up through Kandahar, through Helmand, and then out to Iran. So we were doing a lot of stuff through that area, a lot of removing drug stuff. We weren't doing specifically drug stuff, no CID stuff like that. But so we didn't really have any ISIS in our area. We'd get rumors and whispers, here and there that there might be ISIS there, but we pretty much exclusively had Taliban and then the Taliban Red Unit, so the Taliban SF guys in our area. But then up through the Nangarhar Valley and then up north or further towards Iran, they were dealing with a lot more ISIS stuff in that area. So,
dude, when the ISIS thing was like blowing up in Iraq and stuff, remember when they were like releasing those like high quality like torture videos and shit? It was like,
oh yeah,
what the fuck is happening? Like, this seems like a weird, almost like a weird skit video. It doesn't even seem real that you would like drown a guy in a cage, like. Yeah.
Well, again, we didn't ever come across it, but from what it's one of those things too, where it was different. The whole mentality was different, right? The Taliban forever, it's always been foreign influence like that have come in, Al Qaeda, ISIS, that have caused problems externally of Afghanistan. The Taliban never really cared about what's going on outside of Afghanistan. They just want control of Afghanistan and everybody else to leave. So, the ISIS's whole thing with, like you mentioned, this whole caliphate, torture, take over the world. Yeah, the Taliban really didn't have that. We didn't see that from the Taliban. So definitely different conflict for sure.
For sure.
But also that it was weird, but it was, I think, you kind of, the funding to that, like there was serious money coming into that. So, I mean, I don't know the geopolitical landscape well enough to explain how that was all working, but it definitely, but it was also sort of short-lived. If you think about, in the length of time we were there, that ISIS thing was sort of here and then gone pretty quick. So yeah, definitely a weird thing with that.
Yeah, I mean, they hurt their own brand, right? Being fucking psychos. They're like just doing some of the crazy stuff that they were doing. It's like, how are people even like subscribing to this kind of ideology, you know?
Yeah, we'd always see the memes of like, when the Taliban think you're too extreme, then you probably need to work on your branding.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I think even the Taliban and Al Qaeda both came out and were like, "Hey guys, you know that's not cool." Like,
yeah.
It's such a weird world, man. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's back up a little bit. When you first came in, did you decide to come in? Were you an 18 X-ray, or did you come in and then switch over to SF?
Yeah. So yeah, I was. For me, it was easy, right? My dad is a retired SF guy, also. So I sort of knew the landscape. He was the one that knew about the contract and knew about the road to get there. So for me, it was, way back then, it was, I want to be like dad, right? So and we have a very storied military tradition in the men on my side of the family. My grandpa was in the 82nd, jumped into Normandy.
Oh wow!
My dad was on the A camps in Vietnam, and so that was obviously important to me. But I also wanted to do something like he did in special. So yeah, I came in as an 18 X-ray, or shortly after college, and then I was one of the fortunate few that you go to basic training. So the 18 X-ray contract, for those of you who don't know, it's a contract that guarantees you go straight to Special Forces assessment and selection. That's it. Now, it's whether you get selected or whether you go to the Q course. There's no guarantee beyond just getting to selection. So I was fortunate that I got selected my first try, went to the Q course, made it through my first try. It took me a long time because I broke my leg and my foot, but made it through. And nice. Yeah, it's a rough course. Made it through first time, and then after about 2 years, and then went straight to group. So my entire, other than that first 4 months in basic training, my entire career has been in the Special Forces unit, which is kind of cool.
When you went to selection, how many 18 X-rays were with you that didn't make it?
Yeah,
was that a high percentage that made it or not?
Yeah, so I got the kind of the cool numbers. So I was in a basic training class that actually was almost all, for whatever reason they set it up this way, it was almost all 18 X-rays. So I think we had like 180 out of 200 guys. Now, for those of you who were in that class, those numbers might be wrong, right? So, but close to that, maybe 180 or so guys that were in 18 X-rays in that class that made it through basic training and then went to that selection class. And our selection class also, it wasn't all 18 X-rays, right? There was 420-ish guys, about 150 of us were 18 X-rays. Total from that selection class of 420, 80 of us were selected. And that's not just 18 X-rays, that's just total. And then I do remember of that, so let me back up. Of that original about 180 18 X-rays, in my final graduation class, I think we calculated like 17 of us had eventually completed the Q course and become Green Berets.
Wow.
So
less than
about
10%.
17 out of about 17 out of 180, roughly. So it's
tough stuff, man.
Yeah. And with the 18 X-ray it's a good program, but the problem is you have no military experience.
Yeah.
Right. So you're coming in, you have basic training, and then you go to the Q course. So for me, I had zero military experience, but I was big and I was strong. I had good advice from my dad on, kind of just keep your mouth shut and carry as much weight as possible. But usually the guys, the infantry guys, younger infantry guys coming from like the 82nd or the 101st, usually do a lot better than the 18 X-rays, right? They already have that discipline instilled. They've been out in the field. They've done combat training.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
Yeah, that's would you recommend somebody that's wanting to do SF to go, shoot for 18 X-ray, or do you think they should spend a little time in like the infantry or another MOS first?
I think it depends, right? So now again, I had no military experience, but I had a Green Beret for a dad, right? So the way I was raised and discipline and all those things are drilled hard into me. And I was an athlete all the way up through college. So I sort of had that structure to begin with. And so it worked out okay for me, but a lot of guys, especially the 18 X-rays, wash out of the course, not because they couldn't do the physical tasks, but because they get in trouble, right? They're immature. They do something stupid on the weekends, they go out and get drunk. All those types of things can knock. So I think that I see the most success with guys is having done a year or two in infantry. And I actually know a lot of guys I went through the course with that washed out of the course, went to the 82nd for a year, 2 years, came back, and then made it through and became a group. Lots of guys that I worked with that actually were the same way. So, I tell anybody, I think being in special operations, I suggest that to everybody who has the aspirations of that. It's just no knock on anything else in the regular military or anything like that, but just the opportunities you have, all the benefits, the things you get to do. I mean, it was an amazing career. So I suggest anybody do that, but I definitely think you want to be ready for it, right? You don't want to, the problem with the 18 X-ray contract, right, is if you're not ready, you show up and you wash out. Okay, now you get sent wherever in the military. You have no control over really what that is, right? The military is needs of the Army, they say, right? You're going to go wherever the Army tells you need to go, whether it's infantry or you need to be an S1 clerk or
that'd
whatever.
Be heartbreaking, wouldn't it?
Right. So you gotta keep that in mind, right? Is the success rate is abysmally low, right? There's a lot of luck involved, a lot of not getting hurt, really hurt. I broke bones, but they healed within 3 months. So a window. When I went through, you had 90 days if you got hurt. 90 days to get back to training. If you couldn't get back in 90 days, see you later. So there's guys that tear ACLs or things like that. There's a lot of conditions that need to be right for you to make it through. So, there's a lot of luck. And then obviously you got to be disciplined enough, because really the Q course is so long. It's the longest of all the special operations qualifications course. It's a little bit shorter now. They've shortened it here and there, but it's still upwards of like 18 months, I think. So it's a real test in your discipline over a long period of time, right? A lot of people can make it through selection 19 days, but can you get beat down for 2 years straight? That's something that really can wear guys down.
That's similar to like what PJs and stuff do as well. That long, like 2 year freaking training cycle.
They have a really long course too.
Yeah,
for sure.
When you're going through something like that, what's your mindset? Like, well, let's talk about what specialty did you want to go to, and did you get it? And what was kind of your mindset going through it?
Yeah. So my dad was an 18 Charlie. So for those who don't know, 18 series, Charlie is the engineer, right? He's the demolitions guy. He does the building, whatever, right? But pretty much demolitions. That's the big thing in the course. So I wanted to be, like Dad. I wanted to be an 18 Charlie. But when you go through selection, you get a wish list, right? So you rank, whether you want to be so there's 18 Delta, a medic, 18 Echo, communicator, 18 Charlie, engineer, 18 Bravo, weapons sergeant. So you rank those, and then you don't necessarily get them. They try to give you what you want. So, and a lot of that can work off your GT score, right? So the guys that have the really high GT scores are usually going to get the 18 Delta course, the medic course, because it's an extra whole year of school. It's book learning. You got to be a pretty intelligent guy to deal with all that. So I ended up getting my second choice, which was 18 Echo, so communicator. So I didn't get the Charlie slot. So radio operator, I guess you could say. But yeah, going through the course, I mean, I sort of had this, I guess, again, having my dad as an SF guy was such a benefit just in my head, because for me, quitting wasn't a thing, because I always had, I got to go home and tell Dad that I gave up, right? Which really helped me in a lot of really tough times, because everybody gets pushed to the brink of, hey, I should just give up, right? So when I hit those really, really nasty points, I had that always in the back of my head that sort of would always keep you from pressing that button that you always regret. Every guy regrets it right afterwards, right? Sort of, you ever watch any of the survival shows, right? As soon as they quit, they feel terrible.
They're like, I feel like a piece of crap while I'm eating the food that I wanted, or whatever.
And and the instructors incentivize that, right? So you're out in the woods and it's 35 degrees and it's pissing rain, you're freezing, you're sitting on your rucksack, and they got a huge fire pit going with beers and hot dogs, and hey, all you got to do, and you've been out there for 4 days and you're just miserable. All you got to do is just come on over here and V-dub, and all this is yours, So
that's hilarious that they have a full setup like that.
Oh yeah, there's always stuff like that throughout the course to incentivize you, because that's what they want. Really, the ultimate thing they're looking for is, can we put this guy through absolute hell? It doesn't matter what we do to this person, he will never quit, right? He will literally die before he will quit. So that's kind of the mentality, right? So if you can go in there with that mentality of I will never quit, and have something internally that is a reason, whatever that reason may be, for why you really will never quit, you have a pretty high chance of making it through.
Yeah, something has to drive you. It takes a unique person to even join the military and then to go the special operations route, again. And like you said before, you recommend anybody that has aspirations to give it a shot. I agree. I mean, if you're going to be if you're going to be in combat arms, why not be with the best trained people? They want to be there. And then on top of that, you also have more leeway to dictate your own destiny, rather than if you're like an 0311 or 11 Bravo, your basic infantryman, you're just being told what to do. And that, don't get me wrong, that happens in the special operations. That happens in every community.
Yeah, the military, right?
But people want your input as a SF guy or a SEAL or a whatever. If you're a specialist in something, people want your input. They don't want you just to, instant willing obedience to all orders, which is what they taught us in boot camp. It's, I don't know. It's just a different environment, I think. And I think, like you said, it's just, if you want to do it, then try it, but be ready for sure. Be ready, cause that's like a whole nother thing. And the guys you work with, the guys I've seen, the guys I've worked with, and, I wasn't special operations, but when you work with special operations guys, a lot of these dudes are almost at the level, if not at the level of pro athletes. They take everything about their job serious. It's no, because literally lives are on the line,
Yeah, it's funny, I'm out of JBLM. We do stuff with the Seahawks here and there, and we'll go up there and do training with them, and then sometimes some of their guys will come down and do a little mock Q course thing with us, and hearing those guys, we put you put an 85-pound rucksack on them and throw them on a ruck march and then in a stress shoot and all these things, and listening to them be like, I have no idea how you guys possibly can do this on a day-to-day basis, So but it's that same type of mentality that, everybody wants to be the best. It's always an internal competition on your team and in your unit and all those things. But like you mentioned with how you pick your own career, there's so many options, in special forces, right? Like we talked about earlier, all the different jobs. Well, in special forces on an ODA, each ODA has a different specialty, right? So you have a combat dive team, kind of does the same stuff Navy SEALs do. You have a military free fall team, which I spent the last part of my career on, skydiving. Mountain team, which I spent some time on a mountain team, really cool. You're doing mountaineering and mountain climbing and all that different stuff. So, but with that, you also become, let's say you're on a dive team, you go to a dive supervisor school, right? And then maybe when it's your broadening assignment time, you go down to Key West and you're a dive instructor, or same for Halo. You become a Halo jump master, and then you go to ADIC, and then you become a Halo jump master, and you have 10,000 jumps down in Yuma. There's so many avenues and routes that you can sort of, take your career in cool different ways that that doesn't exist outside of the special operations realm.
It's almost a choose your own adventure, where every once in a while the military throws in a twist you don't like.
Yeah, well, there's always that, right? You're always voluntold into doing some things you don't like, right? Like, a ranger school or whatever, the guys are like, oh god, I didn't want to do that.
You have to do that, right? That's basically a requirement for anybody that wants to get promoted in the Army, right?
Well, so I'm talking to one of my buddy's kids is getting ready to go to selection, and he was asking about that. And so Ranger School, there's obviously a lot of tabbed guys, but so I never went to Ranger School. Again, I was an 18 X-ray, so for me the timeline never worked. Right, I went through basic, Q course, team, started deploying, and as an 18 Echo, as the communicator, I kind of got off scot-free a little bit on that. Usually the teams are like, hey, the 18 Bravo, the new 18 Bravos need to get to Ranger School, right? Whereas I would go to like more technical schools. But so for promotion, if you want to talk about, that's another thing I tell people if you're interested in a career in the military. So promotion, right? So I came in as an E4 because I had college, but I graduated the Q course, immediately Pen D5, 6 months later Pen D6, and immediately 2 years later Pen D7. So I was an E7, 6.5 years in the military. Nice. And then being looked at for 8 in 10 years. So the tab is always important for promotions in the military, but in SF there's also so many other things that you can have that you don't necessarily have to have it. But I will say Ranger School is, I haven't been, but all the guys who've been to Ranger School are always usually more technically proficient, especially in SU squad unit tactics, that type, ambushes, raids. So it's definitely an awesome school. I just didn't have interest. Also, by the time I was gonna go, I had already had multiple knee surgeries, and I was like, I'm not about to put this 130. I did that for 2 years in the Q course. My time is my time with that's done.
Yeah, I knew some recon guys that went and they liked it. They're like, hey, I brought stuff back to the unit that I learned there, and it's a beat down, obviously, but it's also there's like a really good ability to learn stuff. There was also guys that felt like the Marines got beat down a little harder sometimes. There was the tab protectors in the Army. That could be real, or that could be their own, like, finding an excuse for whatever. I don't know. I've never been, but
well, yeah, it's funny. That's funny because that's kind of a common story with the SF guys that go and wash out immediately. Is they just they just failed me because I'm I got an SF tab, right? They're just so you hear that type of stuff sometimes. But
I knew of a recon guy that failed out of jump school because of the PT test at the beginning, because we don't do push-ups.
Yeah,
and it's a very specific way. And I'm like, dude, that's detrimental, man. That's got to be not good for your career to like fail out of the PT test of jump school.
That is a real thing, though. We actually we had a guy in my company years ago that when he went to Ranger School, he failed the push-ups, right? And he came back. The thing was, he was a collegiate football running back, and when we had our battalion fitness test right before Afghanistan, he was the #1 most fit guy in the entire battalion. And he couldn't do, according to Ranger School, he couldn't do 42 push-ups. So
that's when it's frustrating. That's the same thing I kind of thought about this recon guy. I'm like, this dude is in amazing shape. These recon dudes are not fucking weak of heart. They're gonna go out there and do what. I had a guy come on and talk about. I was like, he was recon and MARSOC. I was like, what's the difference? And he's like, recon was always more meathead. Everybody was a meathead, strong PT fucking gods. And then on some of them, there were smart guys also. He's like, the Raiders, everyone's smart, and then there's also meatheads. And to hear like a recon guy fail out of a PT event, I was like, man, I feel like, I don't know, maybe it's because we don't understand the technique, but when it's like that, it's almost like a dick move. You know what I'm saying? Because that really does. I'm sure that guy's career was affected by that. You're a sergeant. You're getting a fit rep that says you failed out of a fucking basic school for the Army, really.
Yeah. I mean, and even that, I remember, our sergeant major at the time was pissed off at him, and they wanted to give him reprimands, but everybody was like, dude, this dude is more fit than any. I mean, he's a fitness god. There's obviously he was getting messed with. You know what I mean? So it's still in the military. There is that perception sometimes too of towards soft guys, right? Of when they go to regular Army schools. Now, I don't think it happens that often, but sort of there's always the jealousy and the envious type of behavior.
Somebody's got a chip on their shoulder. Yeah.
Yeah.
Tell me about the mountaineering training. I haven't had anybody talk about that before because we have a pretty good program up in Northern California at Pickle Meadows, the actual town. I can't remember the actual town name, but Pickle Meadows has a mountain warfare training center, and we like to send guys there.
Yeah, so I was on a mountain team for a year in between being on a dive team for 3 or 4 years and then a Halo team for 3 years. So my time on the mountain team short, so I'm not going to pretend like I'm some expert in mountaineering, but I did get to do quite a few cool. I never went to the mountaineering course. I did the level 1 mountaineering course, or I guess it's level 3, right? It works backwards. Level 1's the highest in that, but the level 3 mountaineering course when we were in Mongolia. But yeah, I mean, which the Mongolia trip was awesome that we went on. We basically went to a place called Tarin National Park, which is this place that people from all over the world come to do mountaineering and rock climbing in.
That's awesome.
And they sent us there to basically just train with the Mongolians who, it's funny because usually whenever we go to train people, you're usually so much better than that foreign nation's army. But, in Mongolia, there's, those guys have been climbing mountains for 2,000 years. They climb up to the very top of these mountains to get the golden eagle eggs, so that you've seen the videos of those giant golden eagles that they have. So that's the thing. So they had these guys that were, that we were training that were just insane at rock climbing. But yeah, so there's obviously the military mountaineering it's got rock climbing involved, but a lot of it is more of, building apparatuses to lift your equipment over, up areas you couldn't get it up over, and moving entire units up through mountainous areas. So yeah, again, I can't talk heavily on it, but I know that I never was a big fan. It was my least mountain climbing. It was my least favorite activity for whatever reason. I could jump out of a plane at 18,000 feet, no big deal. But if I was 10 feet off the ground on the side of a mountain, harnessed in, looking down, I wanted nothing to do with that. So my time on the mountain team was short-lived for sure.
That's hilarious. Yeah, dude. It's for people that have never been up in the mountains, man, like real mountains. It can get sketch real fast if you're like on the edge. I've never done any kind of rappelling on my own or anything outside of the military, so nothing like what you're talking about. But just being on some of the trails out here in California, I mean, like up on Mount Baldy, they just found a dude's body the other day, Julian Sands or some celebrity that died up there. But Mount Baldy, there's always, like almost every year, a couple people die up there on the mountain because part of the trail goes across this. It's called the Devil's Backbone. And it's like this narrow part of the trail, and on both sides is a drop off, like hundreds of feet. And you're talking like the trail width is like 2 to 5 meters, for this like portion. And I think a lot of the times the deaths come from people going up there in the wintertime and not having the correct equipment, or they're not roped off properly or something like that, and they slide down. But yeah, man, being up in the mountains, one, is an awesome experience because you see stuff that most people will never see. You see wildlife. You see this, like, I don't know. In my experience, it was like that. But it is difficult. It's a heck of a climb to get up 10,000 feet or whatever.
Yeah, so the cool thing out of first group is the mountain teams spend a ton of their time in Nepal, right? So those guys get to go up and do K2, and some of them done Everest.
That's legit.
So they get to do really cool stuff. I did one trip on the mountain team to Mongolia, which is a cool trip, but that was definitely my shortest amount of time on the team was on a mountain team.
What a unique country Mongolia is, right? I mean, you have to like appreciate the local expertise of people like that. It's like you said, going to Nepal. I'm not going to tell a Sherpa how to climb a mountain. This dude, his whole family's been doing it for centuries. Like, there's no way I'm teaching him anything. Really,
And Mongolia is so interesting. We were one of the first ODAs to start working in Mongolia, and Just Mongolia. The thing about Mongolia is it's got one city, Ulaanbaatar, right? So if you live in a city, you live in that city. Everybody else still lives nomadically.
That's
but
wild.
it's when you're there, it's built like an Eastern European city. So
Hmm.
all the buildings are Eastern European. They're not like your other Asian countries. And it's also weird, right? Because you have the American embassy, the Russian embassy, and the North Korean embassy all right next to each other. So, there's really nowhere else where you sort of, as an American, you're sort of freely intermingling with all three of those entities, So it was definitely an interesting trip
That's a
compared to the
collections
other
game
places in Asia. Yeah, yeah,
for all
yeah, for
countries
sure.
involved.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that was the thing is we couldn't really do much outside of training for that reason, right? Is it's like everybody's watching everybody there, so
Yeah, the counterintelligence dudes have to be on point, Fuck.
yeah,
That's cool though, man. Yeah, I Bridgeport was a town I was thinking of. I got to go up there one time when I was a mechanic. I was testing out the ITV, which is a little Jeep looking thing that tows around a 120 mortar. And we were driving around through the mountains and everything. But that was my first. I'm from Indiana. It's flat and like not and where I was from at least and stuff. So I grew up in Tennessee as well in the valley in the river valley right there in Chattanooga. So I was around some like smaller mountains, I guess, growing up. But man, when you get out to the Sierra Nevadas and start getting up to these higher elevations, it's a whole nother ball game. And I imagine it's like being a JTAC. It's so technical that you have to constantly
oh
be on it because lives are at
yeah,
risk. You tie the knot wrong, you could fuck up
yeah,
some dudes.
for sure. Yeah, the guys who were level one, so that's the like the highest mountaineering course in special forces. Those guys, pretty sure they do it in Colorado, up in the real mountains. Somebody can correct me if I'm wrong on that, but yeah, those guys are insanely proficient in building apparatuses and how pulley systems, how all that type of different stuff. Really rope work, right? Knots and all these different things that you have to remember and be able to. Yeah, the second you make one mistake and you're dead, right? So that's another one of those. There's no room for any whoopsies types of tasks.
My bad. I put your harness on
Yeah,
backwards.
yeah.
Oops.
There's none of that for sure.
I remember just like trusting our what do we call them? We did. I remember doing SPIE, the special purpose insertion extraction. It's where you're dangling
Yeah,
off a rope.
yeah.
For those that don't know,
Oh yeah,
underneath the helicopter. And I'm not really a heights guy either, but that never bothered me. I felt completely
yeah,
comfortable for whatever reason. I don't know why, hanging on this harness 500 feet off the ground
yeah,
underneath the helicopter, knowing
yeah.
that the Hearst guy, or that's our guy, has the machete for the rope in case it starts going wild. To chop that bitch off.
Yeah, yeah. We did a lot of that. A lot of my last trip in Australia, we did a ton of fast rope work with the Australian two commando guys. That's their sort of Delta type unit that they have, and they're super proficient in fast roping. That's like their thing. But yeah, we did a lot of spies work and fast roping with them. I one of my most favorite and least favorite things to do in the military is fast roping and that type of stuff because
Yeah.
it's so dangerous. It's probably the most dangerous thing you can do in the military. I actually watched an Australian guy just straight up go for the rope and fall out of a helicopter from about 20 feet. He somehow just bounced off the grass
Oh
and was
shit.
fine, but it's just like, whoa, yeah. You miss your hands or miss your feet, and you're gonna have a bad day.
Yeah, that's why it's like required. You got to go work on the tower and stuff like that. Do tower work
Yeah,
before you go and get in the helos. And yeah, I never liked it, but it was like one of those things like you got to do it. Try to be fast. I don't know, just don't fall. And the worst was if you're trying to fast rope out of an osprey.
Oh, I was just gonna say that. So I got a couple pictures I was gonna post on my Instagram soon. Not many people have tried out of an osprey. Well, our ODA only had ospreys in one of our PMTs, and oh my god, for one, you got to reach, you go to the edge of the aircraft, and they hook it up to the top of the aircraft, and you got to reach, all the way out to barely get your hands on it, throw your feet out and try to get in. With that Osprey, that rotor wash is working horizontally, right? So that rope is trying to like pull you up horizontally the whole time. So you're trying to get your feet out over the top of this thing, and the rope is this way rather than this way. Chaos. Yeah. So not a lot of people have done that out of Osprey. It's probably one of the dumbest things I've ever done is
there's a lot of Marines that have done it.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah.
There's a lot of Marines that have done it.
Much, but we don't use it much, but we did have them for that training exercise. And yeah.
I think the best thing you can do is have like the heaviest guy go down first, and then he has to kind of like lay on the rope and be the fucking landing pad for everybody else, so it doesn't fly away.
I'm fortunate. I'm a big guy, so the bigger guys are okay. But we had one of our guys on our team who was the lightest guy on the team. I remember he couldn't even, we had to have a guy like yanking the rope to try to get it more vertically because he couldn't even get down off the rope. He's just hanging
slide
off there
for life.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh man, that's funny. Yeah, dude, that's the stuff that people don't know about. Like, the fun, funny, and kind of dangerous but funny stuff that you do in the military. It's like that's a unique thing. Yeah. You're never going to do that outside of the military. And it's like when you decide to leave, like you did, you're on your way out the door. You come to the realization like, wow, I'll never do that again. There's a lot of stuff that's like the last time I've ever did it was that was it. So it's that'll hit you more. I know you're on your way out right now, but that'll I don't know. It's a weird transition because you're so used to doing stuff, planning for trips, planning for operations, that it takes a little bit to get used to.
No, for sure. I went on my last trip that I was going to do in Australia. I knew it was going to be my last trip. It was, I had a super emotional moment. We were doing fast rope training, standing out, sitting on a car, watching the helicopters go by, and all sort of just out of nowhere hit me at once. Like, this is it, right? My whole career of doing this stuff, this is the last time, and definitely had a breakdown moment there, and then I had a real feel sorry for myself 4 or 5 months, recently, with that same thing you're talking about, the realization of you can sort of, get some of the stuff done, like I'm doing firearms instruction stuff now, which is cool. But there's nothing that compares to so much of this. And again, there's nowhere else to do it. You just can't, so.
I have a photo of my sleeping system and then the horizon out on San Clemente Island, which was my last field op before I got out. And it was really cool, just sleeping on the ground, wake up. And San Clemente Island, for those that don't know, is off the coast of California. It's 30 miles or something. And so the sunrises and sunsets are awesome. The nights are awesome because there's literally no light. You're 30 miles off the coast and there's nothing on the island. Except for on one end, there's a little Navy thing. But it was so cool. I mean, I just kind of gave me time to kind of reflect, The night before we were out there because there was an exercise with the Japanese, and the night before it was just me, my captain, the Japanese commanding officer, and the translator, because we were waiting on another group to come in the next morning. That's why we were out by ourselves. And the Japanese commander made me a cup of noodles. He's like, "Do you like ramen?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And he made me ramen that he had brought with him and stuff, and made me eat it. I was like, "Oh no, don't worry about it." And no, you will. Yeah. But it was and then that, and then going to bed, and then waking up and seeing the sunrise, and just being like, "All right, man, that was, what a cool way to end it," kind of deal. You kind of just really appreciate those kind of moments for sure. Yeah, you start reflecting on them, and you start forgetting the shitty stuff. And you only remember the really cool stuff and your homies. And, the biggest advice I can give you and to other people that are getting out is keep in contact with people. That's really the only reason I even have a Facebook anymore. I don't really put anything on there, but a ton of my military friends are on there and we're all connected, and I don't want to give up that link. And, reach out to people and stuff like that. Just text somebody and be like, "Hey man, thinking about you," or "I just saw this, remind me of you," or whatever. And 'cause if no one initiates the conversation, it'll never happen. And that's what a lot of people miss, is they don't have their buddies to talk to about stuff. And people don't realize the bond that happens when you're, especially on an SF team, when you're a small team of people and you're just around that person all day, every day, doing everything together, doing all this crazy stuff together. You know, it's like, it's closer than family a lot of times. And it's like a bond that you can't really, I don't know, when you step away from it, like you're leaving the military right now, that's gone now. And it's a weird feeling because now you're the dude that's on the outside, you know?
Yeah.
And it feels weird. It was always weird when someone would get out of the unit and it was almost like they disappeared.
Yeah. Yeah,
you know?
for sure. Yeah. I definitely, so yeah, I mean, I have so many guys I'm still close with, which is awesome because we do have that part of the community, and having teammates like that. I still talk to so many of my teammates all the time, every day, really. So that's nice. But yeah, I do. I watch my dad, right, and he still has, he's got a community of the older SF guys those are the only people he even talks to. Like he has no other friends outside of that. You know what I mean? So
no interest in meeting new people.
None, zero, right? At his age, for sure. But yeah, it's crazy when you think about it like that. It's like the worst is for me. I always thought is, the ODA seems to always all break up at the same time because we go through these big, long, train ups and then a big, long deployment, and you're with usually the same 10, 12 guys for 2 years straight. And then all of a sudden, everybody's careers are that's right at transition point. So after our Afghanistan trip, almost the whole team broke off in different ways. So it is weird like that, where you go from having this like family that you're with all day, every day, to all of a sudden everyone's gone. So yeah, that's definitely one of the harder parts about it. But
that's the life of the JTAC and the forward observer. You're the attachment.
Yeah.
You show up and people are like, "Who are you?" And then they finally learn your name, and then they work with you for a while. Then you're like, "All right, check you later. I'm going back to my other unit." And then it's like, yeah, it's weird, man. So I don't know how much time you have because I know you got some other stuff going on.
What time are we at?
About an hour 20, 11:20.
Yeah, I got about, I'd say probably 30, 35 more minutes probably.
Okay, so let's talk. We haven't really talked about any of your deployments in depth at all. When I say, man, that was crazy that happened on that deployment, what's the first thing that pops in your mind?
Yeah, I mean,
is there like one event where you're like, holy shit, I can't believe we made it out of that?
Yeah. So pretty much everyone on my last ODA has Valor awards from one specific mission. We got in 2 separate near ambushes on this operation, right? We had multiple SF guys blown up by a grenade, tons of Afghans hit. So yeah, I think that's the one we all sort of remember. That's, I've got a picture of the morning after that, that has the, that typical 1,000-yard stare look. It's the only one where it's really, you can see like, oh, your eyes are pretty much glossed over and glazed. So yeah, I mean, that's the big one that, I could sort of walk through kind of how that all played out. And so yeah, we were going into an area in Tarin, which is sort of a little bit north of Afghanistan, or a little bit north of Kandahar, that basically, up to 2013, we had already completely controlled that whole area. And then obviously we went away from VSO, which VSO is, for those who don't know, SF would live out in the villages, right? And all over Afghanistan. So we had really taken over a lot of the country that way. And then when we did the drawdown around 2013, all that went away and the Taliban came back and took everything. So we were going back into an area that the Taliban sort of created into a stronghold. And we had to infill into the objective, and we had to infill about a kilometer away just based off of where we could get the aircraft to land because of the terrain. And the spot that we decided to land at, we had seen on the imagery beforehand, there was this little dilapidated, the ISR imagery, the Google Earth imagery is always not the most up to date, right? It would just look like this big dilapidated compound nobody had used for 10 years. So we figure out, all right, we'll land just right on the outskirts of that. So we were flying in, and our helicopter, we landed at 2 separate locations, about 300 meters apart. And where we landed was in this sort of field with a tree line in between into what I like to describe. Once we got off that helicopter and started moving, I was the element leader at the time. I like to think when I'm describing it, to put it in people's heads, is if you're walking through the forest and you're coming to an open area, think about being maybe on like the 50-yard line of a football field, and then you look to your left, you have the big open football field, and sort of where the end zone is huge compound, right? Mm-hmm. So we came out into the field and we're walking up to the compound, maybe 30 meters away, and listening to the ISR tell me, hey, slant 000. Nobody's inside this compound. So I made the decision, hey, we're going to just bypass this compound. That was in the plan ahead of time. We still got a kilometer. We got to walk. We got to get moving, right? It's the middle of the night. We're doing a night raid. We don't have time to clear every single little compound along the way. So as our element started moving up, we sort of hit, what I would say would be the 10-yard line, and facing the end zone at this point, and then turn to parallel the building, parallel the end zone with it, and then walk all the way around. And as we got most of our element right in front of that building, the compound moving, basically all hell blew up out of nowhere. Machine gun fire, explosions, gunshots everywhere. So instantly was, what the hell is going on? Come to the realization, we find out later that there's not 0 people inside, that this was actually a defensive fighting compound. And there was 10 Taliban inside with PKMs, AK-47s, the whole yard. So we are basically standing probably maybe 10 meters in front of this compound in the open field, with basically, all of that coming straight out at us. And immediately all our Afghan guys laid down, and, because it's chaos. And it was me, my 18 Charlie and 18 Bravo, and then my 18 Delta eventually ran up behind me and up past me, because I was the element leader. I was trying to get the Afghan team leader. We're all shooting back and everything. There's all that, but hey, we need to, my biggest thing is, okay, we got to move on this compound, right? Mm-hmm. We got to flank it. We got to do something. We can't stand out here in the open. And he's on the ground too. And I'm grabbing him by, the kit, trying to yank these guys up to get them to move to fight. And they won't move. Our 18 Bravo is basically standing in a doorway with the Mark 48, which, for those of you who don't know, it's a handheld machine gun that we use, SOCOM variant, that still shoots a 7.62 round. Awesome gun. But he's got it basically on full auto, just spraying into the doorway as our other guys were, and again, we're right at this point, we're basically have moved up next to the wall. So now it's just a grenade throwing match. And as I'm trying to get guys to move, my guy I worked with the longest in my career, really one of my biggest mentors, with he had 5-6 combat deployments already, comes running up past me, and just full sprint, yelling, "We got to go." And so at that moment for me, it was there's no point for me to try to get these Afghans to do anything. It's 4 SF guys that are going to have to eliminate this threat. They're not going to do anything. So that became a grenade throwing match, back and forth, shooting in and out of the doorway. At some point, one of the Afghans close to me got shot, drug him out of the way, threw funny. Everything that's terrible also has funny moments, right? So for sure. To get back to that. So grab him out of the way, throw him out of the way, give him to my XO, whose first time he's ever been, he's not an SF guy. We just took him out so he could get the enjoyment of it. First time he's ever been on an operation. 5 minutes into it, we're in a near ambush, right? So his eyes are that big. Oh, man. Throw the guy and yell, "Hey, put a tourniquet on this guy, run back." So that goes back and forth until obviously it killed 5 or 6 of them. And the other 5 tried to flee out the back of the compound at that point. So the gunfire had sort of stopped, and our CCT was like, "Hey, there's 5 guys trying to flee," which we didn't know if they were trying to maneuver on us or whatnot. And we had an AC-130 watching the entire thing, right? So the AC-130, which for those who don't know about, CAS, as you know, is the nastiest thing in the air, right? And so the AC-130 told us, "Hey, we're going to engage these guys with 105 rounds from probably 40 to 50 meters away." So obviously that was get behind the walls as fast as you can. They engaged a couple different times, and that all sort of died down. But, you know, I couldn't even tell you how long that lasted, right? Because in those types of moments, you really lose track of all time and all that. But so that's the first 5-10 minutes of the operation, right? It's an 8-hour operation, but that was like the big heinous one for my element. I ended up running back over to one of the guys that I had drug over there, and his tourniquets are all on the ground, right? And he's bleeding out. And it's like, what are you doing? What are you doing? His Afghan buddies are standing next to him, and he's like, well, he said his tourniquets hurt, so we took all his tourniquets.
Oh my God.
Right? So again, you know, even the craziness, there's funny moments, but
that's so crazy.
Our medic got over and treated them, and we got a medevac in. We got those guys out.
Did that dude make it?
The craziest thing, yeah. So amazingly, nobody as many casualties. And there's another near ambush that's even worse. Our 18 Delta got the Silver Star for it later in the operation. But of all the casualties we took, nobody died, which was incredible for that, right? Tons of gunshot wounds and hit by grenades and all that. But so let's see, where was it going? I gotta get myself back where I was. Yeah. So
yeah, they had fleet out, hit them. Yeah.
Yeah. So we had all those guys had been eliminated. So then we had to go conduct the operation, right? So that was the thing, was like, oh, that's the first 5 minutes. We still got to do this. Well, the craziest thing about that is that big open field is our other helicopter, our other our other Chinook with the other element was supposed to land right there in front of that building in that open field, which had that happened, that'd been, you know how that is.
Devastating,
with,
yeah.
Oh, that would have been astronomically bad, right? Because they had RPGs, PKMs, that helicopter would have got shot down. But for whatever reason, the pilot screwed up, missed it, flew over the top of it, and landed in a field about 300 meters away. Just pure luck, you know. Just
they're usually pretty good. They're usually pretty good about that. Yeah, so to have them mess up,
they usually don't miss, right? So anyway, we start moving on, and we're trying to catch up with the other element because obviously they're farther up towards the final compound we're trying to get to at this point. So we're booking it through the open field, bypassing everything at this point. And we had gotten our way into another compound that was maybe 50 meters behind where our second element had moved up to, and we were gonna get ready to move to them, and basically got all this chatter that and the ISR could see people in this building next to us, and all this chatter about how they were setting up another ambush for us to move through, right? So we decided to slow down, had to wait for the Apaches to basically knock this compound done with Hellfire rockets. And while that was going on, again, machine gun fire, all this craziness happens, and you see machine gun rounds flying over the top of our compound. We're trying to figure out what's going on. Well, now our other element in front of us is in another near ambush, except for the way it worked for them is they were moving around. And I don't want to, I was obviously didn't witness this one, but this is obviously from the guys who were my teammates who were a part of it. Because we had a compound wall in front of us, so we couldn't actually get up to see what was happening. But they were moving around a compound wall, same type of thing. And as they moved around a compound wall, a bunch of grenades get dropped over the top of the walls on top of them. One of the grenades landed basically in between my teammate's feet and exploded. Obviously, amazing story about that is he was the only one that took no shrapnel. He was the one, it blew his pants off, and obviously messed him up super bad. Yeah. We think crazy. It might've been one of those like Russian pineapple grenades or something, but so they get hit by grenades. All three SF guys get hit by the grenades, the Afghans too. And then they had I'm pretty sure, if I remember correctly, a PKM set up at the end of the hallway that after they threw the grenades over the top, then they opened up with the PKM. So the Afghans were getting shredded. And so our 18 Delta, basically, it was him and the Afghan team leader, I think, were the only ones still able to fight that had to eliminate that the threat at the end of the doorway, and then he ended up fighting through that. The Afghan team leader had been shot in the face, but and our medic had just been hit by the grenade too, so he ended up fighting through that. They eliminated that guy, and then he basically drug out everybody one by one, back out around the corner, treated them, and at that point, we had taken so many casualties that we couldn't continue the mission. We actually never made it to the final objective. So we got forced off the objective, which, I think we had killed 58. I think it was 58 confirmed Taliban on that operation up to that point, but we still looked at that as a sort of as a loss, right? Is anytime you're forced off the objective with so many casualties, it's never a good thing, right? So yeah, somehow everybody lived, even the Afghans. Guys got shot in the face and multiple shots to the stomach and all that different stuff, hit by grenades.
That's crazy, man.
Yeah. So, and again, our Delta got the Silver Star or 18 Delta, our medic got the Silver Star for what he did in his actions. Obviously, I've always thought that it should have been higher than that, right? Because the only reason probably any of those guys are alive is because he was right after being hit by a grenade, was able to, eliminate that situation and get everybody out, which you read about those types of things in books. And that's usually the Medal of Honor story is a story like that,
100%.
That's the way that goes. So yeah, that one. And again, our 2018 trip was wild. I mean, we probably did 15, 16 nighttime raids. And that was the wildest, right? But we had quite a few that had things like that.
Yeah, I think your earbuds might have died.
I got one left for now, and then if it goes out, I'll just turn the speaker on so I can hear you.
Okay. I'm glad I was never in a situation where grenades were being tossed back and forth. I know a lot of guys, that had that happen where like guard posts, they'd throw grenades into them, or they'd be on an op, and same thing like you're talking about. They'd be sitting there doing something, all of a sudden over the walls come grenades. Man, I just can't imagine that feeling when that's like such a different kind of, I don't know, on top of IEDs and everything else. Like, I don't want to be worrying about grenades flying over the wall randomly.
And, for us, as we moved through the deployment, we actually sort of modified our kit to where we just carried more and more grenades, because the area we were in, that was sort of that type of fighting, was sort of that compound wall to compound wall style thing. So you'd carry 5, 6, 7 grenades per person, because that's the type of situations we would get in. You know what I mean?
That's so crazy, man. That's just not, I don't know. Those are the things you think about when people are like, man, I wish I could have done something like that. You're like, well, then you start thinking about the grenades flying over the walls, and you're like, that really wasn't that cool. Like you may have done some cool stuff, but that gets real quick, Yeah.
And, that's actually where one of the things I talked about, the CCTs or the JTACs being so consumed. It was during that near ambush that basically yelled and grabbed and threw the CCT out of basically the open area he was at. While that was, the cracks of bullets is, and he's, because he's trying to coordinate the AC-130 to get us a strike to help us, you know what I mean? But just standing in the open with bullets flying by his head, completely oblivious to what's going on. So, yeah.
People don't understand. I mean, even people that are forward observers or whatever, it's hard to understand how busy the radio gets when you start calling in like something's actually happening. And if there's aircraft on state, and in a situation like what you're talking about, they're going to push you everything. So if you're the JTAC on the ground, or CCT, or whoever's controlling the air, you have quite the task ahead of you, because you're going to start getting stacked with aircraft. You got to start thinking, where do I want to put them? Maybe you get a FAC-A that comes in. That's the pilot that is also JTAC qualified, and you can pass some of that information off to them. Let them worry about putting aircraft in different parts of the airspace to deconflict them from each other. That may happen. But at the end of the day, you're still working with multiple aircraft and having to, understand all their capabilities, understand how they can attack, understand where's the best place in the sky to put them that's the safest and most effective and will bring fires down as quickly as possible. You know, it's just like all these like calculations. And that's what I always told people. I was like, to be a good JTAC, really what it comes down to is you have to be able to take in a ton of information. You have to be just on the receiving end of a ton of information from different sources all at one time. And from that, you have to be able to formulate a fire plan that's going to be effective and safe for everybody on the ground. You know, I have to hear the maneuver commander in one ear telling me this, and this is the timeline that they want to meet and all that stuff. And then on this ear, I'm listening to the aircraft and I'm like, okay, here, you know, I'm briefing him and telling him what to do. And then on the ground, I'm telling guys, hey, we need to maneuver here. You know, there's just so much going on that's why even a lot of good dudes I knew that were forward observers really couldn't fit into that JTAC world, because it's almost like information overload. You have to be able to understand how to manage a workload that's just kind of insanely fluid. And you know, a lot of times
in that situation, actually, you know, you talked about how you get a lot of aircraft on station. So from that one, we had the AC-130, we had 2 Apache helicopters on station, 2 A-10s, I'm pretty sure 2 F-15s, and a Predator drone all on station for that happening, right? And they all want to help, right? Because they're seeing what's going on the ground, and that can even further amplify that chaos, right? Because you got 10 different aircraft, they're all trying to get involved and help. You have not only have the element, right, that you have to make sure that you know where everybody's at, so you can call that strike in. But then you have the commander. Then you also have the SOTACC, right? You got to make sure the strikes are called up to the SOTACC. Obviously, in defensive friendlies in that situation, right? The AC-130 pilot, he can just fire on his own, right? He's firing in defensive friendly troops, so he can make that decision on his own. But overall, yeah, there's so much information and so many different people and you're looking at this happening with your own eyeballs, right?
And there's a firefight going on.
That's my point, right? There's gunshots going by your head while you're trying to do all these things, right?
People are yelling, people are injured. Oh, we got injuries. Now on top of all of our attack aircraft, now we need to think about where's our landing zone for a medevac. You know, how are we going to bring those in? Now we got to secure the LZ. We got to do a sweep of that, make sure there's no IEDs or whatever. I don't know what your guys' DTPs were, but yeah, it's interesting, man. I really, I'm glad you came on to kind of tell your story. I know we didn't plan that, but you being a SOTACC, you know, it's always interesting to talk to somebody that's gone to that, because it's very similar, but it's not the same. A lot of Marines know if you go to SOTACC, for whatever reason, you can only control aircraft in the Marine Corps if you're with special operations. You're not certified to control if you're at a regular infantry unit in the fleet. You have to go and get more training, which was always kind of weird to me. But that's, you know, so it's interesting to get that perspective.
Yeah, I think you had to be like TAC P qualified, maybe, is in the Army is how that would work for the regular Army side of things. I don't know for exactly. I obviously didn't go to anything like that, but
yeah. Well, where can tell us about your training, your firearms training, and where people can find you.
Yeah, so just getting started, sort of on the business side of things. I have my NRA. I'm NRA certified, right? So for a lot of people to understand how that works, like if you want to get a concealed carry permit, you got to take a class. And a lot of state by state's different. You got to take a class from somebody that's a certified NRA instructor, so that you can get your CHL. And then also I got partnered with the USCCA, so the United States Concealed Carry Association. They're sort of the other big one next to the NRA as one of their partnered instructors. So I'm going to be working out of the Eugene Springfield area in Oregon. So for anybody who's in that area, let me know. I'm getting set up with a couple different ranges down there. Really can teach anything, right? From doing it so long, that's been half the job of Green Beret is teaching that type of stuff. But
yeah,
teach concealed carry classes, anything from basic to advanced pistol and rifle. But really what I'm trying to do is focus on sort of that self and home defense perspective from the civilian side, which that incorporates, a lot of CQB, because I try to tell people, what is your house, right? What is a home invader? You are in a CQB situation. So I think a lot of that information is lacking, sort of for regular civilians. So I have my Instagram page I just started, which is Valhalla Firearms Training, which I'm sure we could have in the link. And then I'm working on a YouTube channel right now that once I get some long form content that, you know, people can check out. But my biggest thing is sort of teaching in a way from a pragmatic and practicality type of instructor, right? There's tons of amazing instructors out there that can teach you how to pinpoint shoot, you know, the bullseye of a round from 45 feet. Mine is more of teaching from a self and home defense perspective, and also practicality. Why are we doing the things that we're doing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's what I got going on right now. So yeah,
that's good, man. It's I like it. There needs to be more professional instructors out there, because some of the videos that you see on Instagram that people post up of firearms instructors, and I'm using my air quotes, are pretty funny, you know, and sad, really, because it's like, that's the dude that's supposed to be the professional teaching, you know, these impressionable people.
Yeah, and no knock on anybody, right? But what I've sort of seen a lot of is there's a lot of instructing in ways that's great if you're going to just stand there and shoot at a silhouette target, and that's all you're going to do, right? But in a real gunfight or an active shooter situation or a home defense situation, you don't just get to stand in the open and say, I got great accuracy, right? There's movement, fighting behind barriers and cover and all those things that, you know, my time in combat and all my training really lends to that. So that's really what my focus is coming from that. A real world perspective of, if you're going to be in a gunfight situation, these are the types, you know, how to also how to not get shot, right? That's another thing. You see a lot of these videos of just running and sprinting and shooting. It's like, that's great, but not getting shot is just as important as eliminating the threat, because the second I get shot, I'm down, and I'm also a liability to those around me. So different, you know, just ideas like that for regular people who are interested in firearms and self and home defense.
That's awesome, man. I'm interested to see what the content is that you come up with and everything you start working on, and, you know, kind of watch you grow. I think it's always awesome to watch guys come out of the military, because a lot of guys come out and they're like, you know what, I'm tired of working for other people. I've worked for a lot of idiots that I had no say. I couldn't do anything. I just had to deal with it. And now you get out and you're like, I'm kind of my own free, you know, like, let me try this on my own kind of thing. And you look at it and you're like, this is all on me, you know, and it's kind of a freeing feeling. It's kind of scary, but it's also kind of freeing. Because now you can fully do whatever you want and test all those things, those great ideas that you thought you had. So it'll be cool to watch you grow and work through that stuff. For people that want to check out my stuff, at Former Action News, Former Action Guys, both of those on Instagram. J Kramer Graphics is my website. Check that out if you're looking for a unit purchase or whatever. I make it easy so everybody can just come on there and buy instead of collecting money, which is the worst part about doing any kind of unit purchase, is having to collect money from all the bums that want stuff but don't want to pay. So I can help you out with that. I'm also into digital marketing, so if you're looking for Google rankings, SEO, all that stuff on your website, hit me up. And that's it, man. I really appreciate the conversation.